Thank you all for calling that out. In the meantime, I'll just start with a quick introduction and what to expect. But yeah, for those that are new to the Rally AMA experience, we have almost an hour here coming up where Janelle is going to give a little bit of background on herself to start us off. We have a couple questions that you all have submitted beforehand, so really appreciate it. But our favorite part is to be able to ask questions and answer them live. So feel free to drop any questions you have in the chat during the time with Janelle today. We'll try to get to as many as we can. Those that we can answer live, we'd like to follow up with over the recap blog. But nice to meet everyone. A little background on myself. I'm Oren, one of the co-founders and CEO here at Rally. And for those unfamiliar with our platform, we are more than just an AMA company. We are building a user research CRM to enable teams to easily recruit and manage their own customers for research. So if you are experiencing any pain points with recruitment and participant management, do not hesitate to reach out. And without further ado, maybe we could do a quick mic check, Janelle, to see.
Yeah, I'm wondering if this is any better.
That sounds great to me.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right, so by way of introduction, my name's Janelle Estes. I'm currently a lecturer at Bentley University in the greater Boston area. I've spent many years as a researcher. Most recently, before joining Bentley, I moved into a role at User Testing where my title was Chief Insights Officer. And to describe a bit more about that, what that meant or what that means, I was able to work with and spend most of my time with UX research teams that were within our customer base and sometimes those that weren't. And so, I was meeting with teams across varying industries, company sizes, and even maturity levels. So I like to say I had kind of a researcher's dream job. I got to research how research teams were doing research. And I think I learned a lot in the 8-ish years I was at User Testing. And I think our field has been shifting and evolving since the beginning of time, since it started. And today, it's no different. We're continuing to grow and shift and change, and we're constantly evolving. And I often think about, and I know it's a little bit of a stretch in terms of a parallel, but the book that was written by Marshall Goldsmith called What Got You Here Won't Get You There. And I think we have to keep that front and center when we think about the future of our industry and how we need to evolve and adapt as professionals. So while I learned a lot at User Testing, and prior to that, I was at Nielsen Norman Group doing user research and user experience, engagements and consulting. I've arrived at a place in my career where I'm ready to influence and really shape the next generation of UX researchers by applying what I've learned about what some of the best UX research teams do, alongside some of my future predictions, because I am constantly thinking about the future and I'm constantly thinking about the next big thing. And to be able to do that within, a learning environment, that's really, where I'm finding a ton of value and motivation in my career today. So I'm currently at Bentley University within the Human Factors and Information Design graduate degree program. And I'm working very closely with folks who are in the program. And I teach 2 classes that are primarily focused on user research or user experience research. I'm having a ton of fun, and it's a lot more rewarding than I even imagined. So it's an exciting time for me.
Amazing. Thank you for the intro, Janelle. We are going to be covering a lot of topics today, and we even have a few polls that we'll start sharing in a moment. But the first topic we'd love to hear about and get some of your thoughts on is kind of a lay of the land on where the UX research space is currently. You've had the benefit of kind of seeing from your entire career experience and at the user testing organization, how research teams have evolved over the past decade. So would love to see or hear some of the trends that you've observed throughout that time.
Yeah, I mean, if we think about sort of the last, decade or so of user research and how it's all evolved and getting to a place of where we are today, I think today there's a few threads that are top of mind for folks. But before we sort of visit those topics, I would love to, take a step back and kind of think about how it's evolved over the past decade or so. I think it's everything from, and I apologize, I have my dog who clearly very much wants to be part of this session today. If you give me just maybe 30 seconds, I'm going to shut the door so you can't hear. Hang on 1 second. Sorry about that.
All good. And in the meantime, I can start one of our polls. So if you all want to head to the poll area, you can answer the first question that we have on the challenges that you faced in the current UX research landscape, and we'll cast it on the screen in a bit. And welcome back, Janelle.
Okay, thank you. I apologize for that. Yeah, we'll get back to the current challenges, but if we want to think a little bit about kind of where we've come and how we've arrived at this place, where, thinking about, even 10 years ago or so, where research was done. At the beginning of my career, it was all done in person. We were renting lab spaces. We were bringing participants to us, whether that was in an office setting, or maybe we were even going to our participants. And there's some of that work that still happens today. But with the introduction of remote technologies, I'm not talking about testing solutions. I'm actually talking about things like, back in the day using GoToMeeting or WebEx to connect with your users and participants. That sort of introduction of that technology was the first taste of how we can kind of do this more efficiently, do it at scale. In addition to some of these remote technologies, we've also had different ways where we've been able to expedite or create efficiencies around the recruiting process. And now, faster time to insight through some of the automated analysis that's provided through some of the testing solutions. So we've moved from a fairly manual process, a fairly in-person process, to introducing efficiencies that's allowed us to do more faster, again, and more efficiently. Thinking about also who does this work. Back in the early days of my career, it was primarily trained researchers. And obviously, a lot of that is still going on today. We still have lots of big research teams and small teams and teams of one who are dedicated to this function and this work. But we also have people outside of research doing what we call user experience research. So designers might be testing their own prototypes or designs. Product managers might be vetting ideas, or they might be exploring a problem space. And in some cases, in some of the organizations that I've worked with in my past, I've seen everyone empowered to talk to customers. We worked with companies who would have a requirement where every person in the company would need to connect with a customer at least once a month. And that, of course, the researchers sat at the center of that, and they were really creating some protocol and operations around it. But the idea was getting, employees closer to customers was a way for everyone to build more customer empathy and ultimately create experiences that exceed customer expectations. I also think the frequency of doing research has changed. So, early in my career, we would engage with a client, for example, and we would do a quarterly test. So we would have a contract, and it would be 4 usability tests a year of their key flows. You can do this work so much faster now, as I mentioned at the sort of start of this answer. So, you're able to do things that, you can get feedback in minutes, in hours, in days. You can move really quickly, and, it's done on a much more frequent cadence. And I also think, the thing that gets me most excited is where research is done and how it's being used. So, traditionally, we were spending time identifying usability issues, and I'll be the first one to tell you that identifying and fixing usability issues are certainly one of the very high value parts of our job. But thinking about pushing that research or pulling those insights further up the funnel. So before we even get to an interface design and before we're even testing, whether or not something is easy to use, we're figuring out, do we even build this thing? Is there even a problem in the market that we need to solve? And are we solving it correctly? So, I think there's lots of things that have changed over the last decade or so. I think we're at a really interesting place within the industry today and within, the evolution of our role as researchers. I think in terms of some of the challenges, and I'm not sure if the poll has come back yet. Let me take a look and see. Or it's still open.
Got it streaming right here now.
Okay, awesome. Yeah, so these are some of the things that are, front of mind for us right now. So cutbacks and layoffs. So, teams getting smaller, teams getting laid off completely. Some of the challenges around automation and artificial intelligence. And, with some of these technologies, they're going to be able to expedite some of the processes that have required more people power. And with that, is there an opportunity for some of these technologies to take the place of people? That is one of the questions that we're all sort of, grappling with at the moment. But I think what's important and what I see as the most common, response here is uncertainty. So when we're unsure, when human beings are unsure about what's going to happen in the future, it creates anxiety and it creates uncertainty. And while I believe that there are things that are unclear at the moment, and there are things that we need to build sort of a North Star and a line around as an industry, I do believe this is the opportunity for us to use this time to reframe how we think about the value that we provide to our organizations, the value that we provide to building experiences, and the value that we provide, quite honestly, to the greater good. How do we use what we have? How do we use our superpowers and the things that we're good at user researchers to reframe how we want to show up? And I don't have the answer for you today. I have some ideas. But I would really challenge, and I am sort of challenging the current way that we practice our work, because I think there's more opportunity and there's greater impact that we can have than what we are doing today.
Awesome. Thank you for that, Janelle. I guess on that point, why don't you kind of shine a little light on where you think some of the problems are today with how the industry is kind of going about this work?
Yeah, so I think there's a few things. So in the past, and even how we work today, I see a lot of UX research teams that are playing within the bounds that they are given. So oftentimes UX research teams live within product organizations, at least in tech. And oftentimes if you're not in tech, if you're maybe, at an e-commerce type organization, you're likely supporting something like the website or the mobile app. So you typically live within these parts of the organization, and oftentimes you live within or you work alongside a design team or a design function. And we tend to play within that space because that's the space that we have been given. So there's two issues with this. One is, or there's two issues that I typically see happening with UX research teams. The first is UX research teams are developing their own processes and their own workflows when they're within these product teams or web teams or mobile app teams. And what they're doing is they're often creating workflows that live outside of how the rest of the team works. And what they try to do is then bring those teams into their process. This usually doesn't work. The more successful teams that I've seen are the ones that sort of best understand how the teams that they're partnering with operate. So how does the product team operate? How does the design team operate? And then how do we integrate ourselves into their world? And, some people think of this as sort of like a sellout, or no, I don't want to adopt those practices. I don't think those practices are the right way to build products or the right way to be customer driven. But some of the greatest UX research teams that I've seen have not only inserted themselves or been, figured out how to integrate themselves into the process of these other teams that they're collaborating with, but then they've influenced and changed how products are designed and built, because they've built relationships and they've collaborated with these teams in a way where they've demonstrated, here's the value that we can provide at these certain points in the process. And, if we can work together to make that happen and to help everyone be successful, those tend to be the teams that, have the most impact, in terms of building customer-centric or user-centric products and experiences. I would love to see more UX research teams operate like that, as opposed to operating outside of how the other things get done in the design and product teams. I'd also would love to challenge us to think about where UX research traditionally lives, and perhaps even what it's called. So the trend today is to place UX research within a product organization. It doesn't live there everywhere, but it's very common. And oftentimes, but not always, but oftentimes that research team rolls up to UX design. And this greatly limits our purview and our scope. I also think about our name, user experience research. That can really limit the perception that others have within our company about our function. And many end up just sort of relegating these tasks of making the UI easier to use to our teams and to our groups. And that can be less than rewarding work. It's important work. It needs to get done. But if we are only focusing our time there, the rest of the organization is missing out on the impact that we can have and sort of the overall value that we can provide. I have ideas and I have visions of what I would love to see the future look like. But I think these are, some of the challenges that we're facing today, in some areas where I think we can push the boundaries a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, amazing. Something that we've seen as well, of course, within our work. A lot of these research teams are within the context of product and design. Is there anything actionable that you can share that you've seen work within organizations to help research teams kind of push beyond those boundaries and show their value at the kind of organizational level, as opposed to just within kind of the product design world?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think, and there was a question that came in ahead of the AMA today, just around, relocating where user research teams live. So moving it out of the UX department, out of the product organization, and potentially integrating these teams into a broader insights function, which pairs with teams like market research and data science and other groups that are focused on customer understanding. I believe that, in the future, those, that's an option. So I don't think it's the answer, but it is an option. If we want to, think about what are ways that we can consolidate all the information that we have about our customers. It hasn't traditionally functioned this way. And I primarily believe it hasn't functioned this way because if you think about a product team and a product organization and what they're measured on and who they report to, that is different than, let's say, a market research team and what they're responsible and who they report to. So the way that we're structured and why we're structured this way is actually it's attributed to organizational structure and how businesses run. And as we know, I think about the early days of when websites were first being launched, and actually it still exists today, these big enterprise organizations or even smaller companies, you'd go to their website and their information architecture would be basically a representation of how the company was structured. We have gotten away from that. We've created experiences that are more customer centric in terms of what we show on our website, for example. But I still don't think we've gotten away from that challenge internally. We're still dealing with teams that are focused on their specific goals, and there's no ill intent there. That's the thing I want to make clear. There's no, it's not like people are doing this because they don't want to be customer centric. It's just because of the way the organization is structured. So I would love to see more companies adopting this shared insights function in the future. I know there are a couple of companies who have made that, strategic decision now. So of course the benefits are that you're going to be collaborating with other insights teams. Maybe you're consolidating your insight and data with some of these technologies. Perhaps we can even apply predictive analytics or predictive insights. I think future thinking and strategic thinking, that's all something that's within our scope in the future. Of course, there's going to be, if you were to combine insights functions, maybe fewer turf wars. I think there tends to be turf wars between market research in particular and user research. So whose job is it to do what work? So if we are combining these functions, there's less of that's happening. I think the risks, though, of thinking about having this shared insights function is potentially consolidation of talent. If we think about, there's a market research team, there's a user research team. If we combine these two teams, there's going to be overlap. Do we still need all these people? And so that's a concern that I have, but perhaps it's something that we need to figure out in order to move forward with pooling our information and pooling our understanding of our customers. I think there's also, so that's sort of like I don't want to say it's the easy next step, but it's sort of the most obvious next step of the future. I think about user research in that if it was into a combined or a shared insights function, I think about the opportunity there of user researchers being able to focus beyond just usability testing and some of the more, evaluative work that we tend to be given. I do think that there's an alternative, which is where I think about, and I've seen it in some companies, usually younger companies, that actually start with the customer at the center of everything that they do and everything that they create. So instead of actually having these dedicated functions, it's just part of what everyone does. And I think this is, I think it's an exciting time if we think about the opportunity for companies to be more customer centric and make customer driven decisions in everything that they do. I think it then becomes a little bit scary for people like UX researchers who have built up these functions over time. And what does it look like if we no longer have dedicated research teams and functions? What does it look like if this is actually just part of what everyone does? I have seen this happen successfully at a few companies. Some, primarily, again, there are younger companies that start from the very beginning, and this is integrated into their values and what they do and how they make decisions. I've also seen it kind of rolled into or sort of, if we think about older legacy companies, right, who may be 100 plus years old, I've seen them also adopt some of these practices where everyone is, speaking with customers, or at least has access to building some level of empathy with the people that they're making decisions for. So, in terms of the future, I think those are likely the two most common paths. I think the second option that I've offered up is a little bit more provocative and maybe a little controversial, but it's a possibility.
Yeah, and I'm curious in that second world, where do you think UX research can be most valuable, or what's dubbed as UX research today, but researchers can be most valuable in that world where everyone in the organization can talk to and learn from users directly?
Yeah, I think the most common, or the most, the place that makes the most sense for UX researchers in that world is really around thinking about how to support it and help make it happen. And that's in two ways. The first way is to, if we think about the traditional role of research ops and that function that has grown significantly over the last 5+ years, how do we set up infrastructure, process, training, governance to ensure that if and when people talk to customers, that they are trained properly, that they know how to ask the right questions, that they know what to do with the data, and essentially that they're then sharing that data back in some meaningful way with the rest of the organization. So I think that there's the function of doing the work, right? And having UX researchers think about what's the best way to make this happen. And what's the best way to make it happen in a way that we feel like the integrity of the work is being retained. The second piece of this is thinking about what do we do with the information that we're learning and how do we share that outwards to our organizations? So, I believe that there is a place for people within an organization who might not actually be, let's say that program exists, but maybe they're not talking to customers. Maybe it's not part of what they're goaled on. Maybe it's not part of their job. Maybe they don't have to have a conversation with a customer every month. But how do we still bring them closer to the customer? How do we expose them to the customer in some meaningful way? So thinking about things like ongoing exposure to customers. How do we integrate customer insight and build customer empathy, or help people build customer empathy in places where they already live and where they already work? Is there a Slack channel that has a feed, right? Or a channel that shares people reacting to your most recent marketing campaign, or people talking about the product feature that they really, really want the team to build? Is there a place within, let's say you're in a physical office, you go into the break room, you're grabbing a coffee, you see a video playing, or you see some data around how people are reacting to the latest mobile app update, what they like about it, what they don't like about it. I see this world where we are able to sort of pull the human in to where people are already working and where they already exist. I'll give you an example. When I first joined user testing, I went to a big fast food restaurant organization. And I remember walking by this room when I was on site, and it was a fishbowl room. So it was all glass around it. You could kind of see in, and there were all these people in there on bean bags, and they were looking up at these monitors that were showing the feeds of Twitter. At the time it was Twitter, now X, Facebook, and I think it was Foursquare at the time. And they're essentially just watching this data come in terms of how people were reacting to this new feature that they had launched, or new offering they had launched, which was order in app and pick up curbside. So they were watching it almost like I was imagining them having like bags of popcorn. They didn't have popcorn, but I could see it kind of happening. But they were watching this stuff come in. And I remember thinking, oh, that's really interesting that they're watching and they're being exposed to this information. And they're able to quickly see and kind of have their pulse on what people are saying about the experience. But imagine if there was, another screen showing that actually showed people using the product or using the new feature, or having the item delivered to them in their car while they're sitting there. Like, what's stopping us from adding that element? I think companies are, given the proliferation of data collection and all the data that we have at our fingertips, we tend to be number driven. We tend to be feed driven. We tend to be dashboard driven. What about being more human driven? What about being more custom? What about bringing the human or the customer into our world and into our conversations? And that is something that I believe there's opportunity for us as UX professionals to be part of making that happen. I would love to see a world like that exists in the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's a perfect transition into the next topic about what needs to change within this world. And to kick us off, thank you to everyone who's already responded to the poll about some common misconceptions about UX research. So I'll add it to the stream, and if you haven't responded yet, feel free to pop in. And Janelle, feel free to react live.
Yeah, for sure. So the question was around common misconceptions?
Correct. Yeah, so The poll should be streaming on your screen if you can see it there.
Okay, great. So common misconceptions, it's slow and expensive. Yes, 100, 200, 300%. So Oftentimes, and a lot of the times it's using the word research. Like research sounds slow. Research sounds expensive, right? So how do we say, get some quick customer insight or get some quick customer feedback? With the proliferation of all of these tools, you can get feedback really quickly and it doesn't have to be expensive. Now, 10 years ago when I was at Nielsen Norman Group and companies were engaging with us for a study, it was tens of thousands of dollars and it took, 6 to 8 weeks for us to turn around a deliverable. It's like we can't, stop operations and say, okay, everybody, like take off the next 6 to 8 weeks while we do this research and we'll come back with some information for you to keep building and keep moving. The team was still moving while we were doing that research. And then we deliver the report and, some of the findings could be applied, but sometimes it was too late. And so thinking about, okay, if the team has a question or if we want to make sure that this is the right feature to build, or, there's opportunity for us to look at competition to make sure this is something that we should invest in too. This again can happen very quickly and it doesn't have to be expensive. I think another common misconception, the second most common response here, is around focusing only on UX and design. I think, again, based on where the organization or where the team lives and what we're called, that's what people tend to associate us with. But there, like I mentioned previously, are lots of opportunities for us to do things differently. The actionability is something else that's interesting. I think as researchers, we tend to be really good at collecting information and reporting out on issues, but sometimes those reports aren't particularly framed in a way where the team is clear around what they have to do and what action that they should take. So I do think that is a challenge that we have, but to me, that comes down to a team or an organization or an individual who understands how to craft insights in a way where people can actually take action.
Awesome. Thank you for that. So one of the questions on kind of what needs to change and how folks can begin to evolve that was submitted in advance was about the job market for UX research. Someone said, well, the job market is wild. How can we build skills to differentiate our offering to the companies that are hiring? Which skills should we focus on?
Yeah, so this was a good one. I think, yes, the job market is wild. We know the last couple of years since 2022, things are a little volatile. So if we think about why that's happening, a big part of it is just the crazy growth of tech in particular and this over kind of hiring and this correction that the market is going through at the moment. That's a big piece of it. The other piece of it is teams or organizations saying, okay, if we need to get rid of headcount, like I hate to say it that way, but I've been in these conversations as an executive, if we need to, reduce team size, what teams are a nice to have and not a must have? And oftentimes UX research is on that list. And so how do we stop that from happening? How do we position ourselves to be business critical, mission critical, not on the list? And I think that is really tied to making sure that our work and the value of our work is clearly demonstrated and articulated. So I see teams, will track UX related metrics, things like SUS, for example. Maybe they track that quarterly and report out on it. Sure, it's something that's important to collect and something that the team can reflect on to see improvements, hopefully over time. But this doesn't mean anything to your head of finance. This doesn't mean anything to the folks who are making the decisions around, what to do with headcount. Where you should be thinking about spending your time and developing your skills is understanding what makes the business run and how does your work impact that? Are you growing revenue? Are you reducing costs? Are you reducing risks? Are you getting to market faster? What are the things that are deeply valued by the company? I remember the first time I looked at a balance sheet, I think my eyes crossed. But it's being familiar with that language. I think we have to be multilingual as UX professionals. UX and the language that we speak is very, it's very specific, and it's an expert language. And that language does not translate to people outside of user experience. We have to also think about what are the languages that the people around us speak, and how do we become fluent in those languages? So that is one skill in one area that I would recommend. And I think, thinking about that, right? And then also knowing your foundations very deeply. So, given that I work at a university within a well-respected human factors related program, I'll always lean towards formal education. I have a master's degree as well. It can certainly differentiate you in the hiring process. In speaking with hiring managers, particularly those hiring for researchers, they often look for those credentials. Most of the time it provides positive differentiation from applicants, but not always. Sometimes it means that the hiring manager realizes now they have to unravel all of the things that they learned in a master's program that might not actually apply in the real world. So thinking about your education, and again, that can be a differentiator as you're applying to jobs. Beyond formal education per se, continual upskilling, continual learning, having a curiosity mindset. I also think specializations is an interesting place for UX folks to play. So if you've spent a ton of time or a little bit of time even in a particular industry, is that something that you lean into? Is that something that you develop your portfolio around? Or if you have a particular specialization around something like VR or gaming or other specific types of modalities, is that something that you lean into? So how do you stand out and differentiate or specialize? And then I also think strategic thinking, problem solving, these are the core of our skills set that will never be irrelevant. I think just given the way that UX researchers, I think people are oftentimes born UX researchers. My mom tells a story around how I was at the grocery store with her when I was like 5 or 6. And, a couple weeks later, I asked her, why was the man in the red shirt, buying 4 boxes of Cheerios? Like, I was so curious about the most random things, and would remember and perceive and sort of observe and be curious about those things. And I think those are the strengths that we have that are inherent to us. So observation, analysis, creative thinking, critical thinking, problem solving, those are all skills that really honestly cannot be displaced in this market. I think about, something like, so I'm teaching a graduate class on usability testing. And what's the most common question we hear, right? How many people do you need to include in a usability test? So what did I do? I shared with them all the literature. And by the way, there's tons of literature on this. Should it be, the 4 to 6 people? Should it be more like 20 people? Should it be, somewhere in between? Should it be more? Should it be 100 people? So they saw the literature, and, they saw the reasoning behind it. And then we went to a generative AI platform and we plugged in, how many I'm testing. We gave an example. I'm testing a prototype of a redesigned homepage. How many people should I include in my usability test? And of course, the generative AI platform we were using gave us the answer that was some version of a summary of the literature. And while that's helpful, what I made sure we did as a class was talk about what's the context around all of this, right? So where are we with the prototype? Is it just a wireframe or is it fully designed? How drastic were the changes from the current homepage? How many people are going to be involved in the testing? How many people are going to be observing? What's their expertise level? Are there versions of the homepage that we want to compare? And would that influence our sample size? And so these are all of the questions and the context that are really when you think about an example like this, there's likely a cut and dry answer that you can get from something like even a Google search, but in this case, I'm using generative AI. But what that can't provide is the deep thinking and the critical analysis around all of the context around where that test is happening, why it's happening, what version of the prototype we're testing. Those are things that will influence your decision of how many people to include in the usability test. And back to your original question of what skills to work on, continuing to build those strategic thinking and problem solving skills.
Wonderful. Well, we will be getting a little deeper into the UX research superpowers through the poll that we just launched, but want to quickly jump to a question submitted by Kelly here. She 100% agrees with you. We need to demonstrate how research impacts business goals that we're seen as a must-have. The question is actually too long to show on this aspect here, so I'll take it off and just read the rest of it. The TLDR: how do we demonstrate that our work saved the company money by preventing the launch of a product that doesn't work?
Yeah, great question. And I think so. Couple thoughts. The first one is thinking about, so if we think about, okay, maybe not launching a product or not launching a feature, we find out that it is something that people are interested in. We actually just did this work with a client for one of my classes. She has a nonprofit and she is developing content for female athletes to help build their confidence around playing sports. And being on the field and being competitive. And she wanted to develop, she had all this content for elementary age students, but what she didn't have content for was high school students. And so she wanted to understand, is this a market? Is this something I should invest in? And you can imagine with a nonprofit, there's not a lot of money to invest. And it's, when you choose to do something, it's a significant cost of resources and time, and in this case, technology, because she was going to develop something that would be available online. So the class did some research, some market research. They talked to coaches of high school female athletes or female identifying athletes. They talked to athletes that would fit this demographic and who the nonprofit was targeting. And what she learned was that it wasn't a good idea. People weren't actually interested in it, or they didn't see a need for it, or they were getting this information elsewhere. And so she decided not to build this, it's basically like a content type offering that was powered by technology. So what did this save her? This saved her time. This saved her the cost of the technology, right? So those are hard costs that we can associate. And if you were to translate this to something like a product organization, think about the cost of the sprint, right? Think about how many, weeks of development time does it cost to create this thing? So that's number one. Then think about what are the things that we have to build to then support all of this functionality. Do we need to train our support team? Do we need to make sure our sales reps know about this functionality and how to sell it or how to position the value? What's the cost of training people within our own organization to speak to and support this functionality? And then think about what is the marketing motion that we have to go through to actually launch this feature? What are the campaigns we have to pay for? What's the people time that we have to spend to, develop the marketing campaign? What's the technology investments that we have to make or continue to make to support all of this? So I encourage you to think about not just the cost of building the thing, but think about the cost of supporting it, marketing it, and in some case, sunsetting it if it ends up not being a good investment of, if customers don't adopt it. And then of course there's the broader part around brand perception or company perception. What if you launch something and it fails, or people don't like it, or people don't adopt it? What's the cost to how people perceive your company? What's the cost to your brand at that point? So there's lots of things that are tied to choosing not to build something. And I encourage you to try to quantify that as well.
Super helpful, and love the stories and examples. Amazing. Well, I think that brings us into our next big topic and poll here on how researchers can use their unique superpowers to get us to this next level of being more strategic. So if you have not already filled out the poll, please head to polls and you'll see the new active one. And I'm just going to start streaming it so we can see live.
Oh, favorite UX superpower. Yeah, remaining curious. Yes, for sure. These are our superpowers. Collaborating, playing nicely with others. Yes, absolutely. That's an area, that we can use to kind of future-proof our role within organizations. I do believe communication, and by communication, we mean, or I mean, not just communicating research findings, but communicating our value, communicating our impact, communicating how we can potentially help. These are all things that are important. I also think one of our super, of course, building empathy and understanding people. So oftentimes what we do is we spend 90% of our time looking at people outside of our organization. We're talking to customers, we're talking to end users, we're talking to maybe customers of our top competitors. We're trying to understand externally our market or our user base and what they need and what their preferences are and how we create better experiences for them. We are superstars at that motion. And I think of that as sort of work that's done outside of the organization. Where I see us fall down is taking those same superpowers and applying them internally. So what I mean by that, if you are partnering with the product organization, or if you're partnering with the marketing organization, what are the things that that team cares about? What keeps them up at night? What are they goaled on? What's the language that they speak? And how do you present what you're finding and learning about your customers to those stakeholders? Think about the people that you partner with as another customer, as another user base that you have to deeply understand and empathize with. That is something that more teams need to do. Back to the sort of quote I used of what got you here won't get you there. To get there, to remain relevant in the future, it's really about making sure that your work is relevant and is applicable and speaks the language of the folks that you're partnering with within your organization.
Awesome. And some more thoughts in the chat here from Robert. Superpowers facilitating, thinking beyond the question, asking the right questions. Awesome. Great. So another question that popped up a lot before the session itself, the AMA, was on what skills would you recommend researchers invest in now to future-proof our careers?
Yeah, so I think we talked a little bit about what to focus on just in terms of things like knowing the foundations, understanding and remaining really good at problem solving and creative thinking and analysis, collaboration, all of those things. But I think one of the things that I would encourage everyone to focus on is building a broader skill set. So the things like problem solving, critical thinking, playing the long game. I think there's a lot of uncertainty, as we talked about it earlier. I think with the introduction of new technologies, with recent layoffs and reduction of force, with just a lot of this uncertainty, I would recommend and encourage folks to think about that broader skill set instead of focusing on the best and brightest new technology. While it's important, right, to understand new technology like generative AI, getting familiar with it, knowing its strengths and weaknesses, how it applies to common scenarios within your work, thinking about those broader skill sets along the way as well. So as I mentioned, problem solving, critical thinking, analysis and synthesis. How do you make sense of all the data that comes at you? How do you do that efficiently? How do you do that quickly? How do you then communicate that in a way that resonates with folks? So building your communication skills, building your collaboration skills. You can do all the research in the world, if you want, but if you can't play nicely with others and articulate your work in a way that resonates and has impact, you're not going to maximize your career potential. Your work is about doing research, but it's not all that it's about. It's really about working within a team and ultimately making the organization and the mission of the company successful.
Awesome. Super helpful. We have one last poll here, which is an interesting one on kind of future career progressions. So I'm going to get that one started. If everyone wants to head to the poll. Awesome. And maybe in the meantime, we've got a question from Kelly here. So in terms of skills, Janelle's talking a lot about the soft skills. Are there any specific methods or content expertise that you think is especially important to invest in?
So in terms of, some of the soft skills like, collaboration, communication, relationship building, problem solving, probably less problem solving and more on the softer skills of people and interacting with others. So I think you have all of that already. If you are a researcher who is working regularly with end users and customers, maybe you're doing interviews, maybe you're doing usability tests, you, at least in my career, have, honed those skills over time of how do I make somebody feel comfortable? How do I get them to tell me more? How do I get them to better articulate how they're feeling? There are things that you've learned and prompts that you use that get people to share more. And I think, again, taking those same skills and flipping them inward, I find myself doing this in my personal life all the time, asking why or asking questions that get people to talk more. I find myself doing this as an educator. So, taking a lot of those soft skills that you've already developed and applying them in other places. I also think that, in terms of methods or different different types of exercises that you could do to try to kind of get better at this. I think a lot about this as an educator and training people how to get good at something like interviews or usability testing, putting yourself or giving people a scenario to then decide, how do I want to handle this? What would I say? What are my options? And what's the result when I actually, choose a path, sort of a choose your own adventure type experience. Those are the types of scenarios that are fun and helpful for you to kind of play around with. I don't have any specific recommendations, but, thinking about how do I almost find ways to put myself in some of these mock scenarios. So you could be through your community. It could be other connections that you have, or you could start trialing some of these things.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. So there's a long question in here from Sean, so maybe we can start going through the first part of it in the last couple of minutes here. Probably we'll only have time for one more question, but the question here is, how can UX researchers effectively advocate for user needs and foster empathy within an organization that traditionally resists understanding user perspectives, especially when they are tasked with both representing users and understanding balancing that with business objectives?
Yeah, it's a great question, and a lot of the uphill battle, right, that some of us find ourselves in, especially in organizations that usually see it in organizations that tend to be older, or maybe like legacy companies been around for 100+ years. But not always. I see it in tech-driven companies too, where we're focused on getting the next release out, and at all costs. Thinking about one of the things that I've learned in my career is balancing storytelling with metrics. So let me share a quick example, and I know we're getting close to time here. But when I was at user testing, we were advocating for the product team to build a new feature. And we were doing it through the use of storytelling. We were saying, I talked to this customer, they've been asking for it, or I talked to this customer and they said they would use this feature. And it wasn't enough to convince. We were even using video clips. We were storytelling. And it wasn't until we actually went into our book of business and we identified who are the customers that are sharing this feedback with us, and what's the revenue potentially that's at risk if we don't build this feature. And pairing those two things together, the narrative and the numbers, that's what really convinced people. So I think oftentimes to actually go ahead and we didn't actually build the feature. We ended up acquiring a company that provided the feature for our users. But that was also a business decision that we made based on what was important to us at the time. But as UX researchers and as UX folks, I think we lean towards the storytelling because we're drawn to humans and we're drawn to sort of building empathy and helping others see and hopefully build empathy as well. But we have to remember that not everybody thinks like us. Not everybody responds to that type of information. And some of the hard numbers and metrics are things that really get people to pay attention. So finding ways to combine those two things, you're not in an organization that is primarily business focused. You are not going to do yourself any favors by saying, our users really want this, or watch this video of somebody struggling. What you're going to do is have to build a stronger story. And usually that story includes not just what the person is saying and what their experience is, but also what it means to the business if we don't actually fix or do something about it.
Wonderful. Well, I think we are officially at time. This flew by. So thank you very much, Janelle, for the amazing insights and the stories throughout. Those always help really drive these concepts home. So thank you everyone for joining. Appreciate your lunch hour or morning hour or evening hour, wherever you may be in the world. And feel free to sign up for some of our future events if you enjoyed this one as well. And hope you all have a great rest of your day.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Oren.
Thank you. Thanks, Janelle. Bye, everyone.